All right, everyone. Thank you. Who's already in here? I know I see a couple of individuals in here. So if you will, just bear with us for just a few more minutes. We are getting all of our panelists to join in, and they're in the backstage getting ready. And we'll be live here in just a few minutes with those. If anyone has any general questions while we're waiting on the panelists to join, please go ahead and put those up in chat. Or raise your hand and I can unmute you and we can have a quick conversation. Got about 2 to 3 minutes before they join in. Hi, Barbara.
Hey, Sherry.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so good to see you again. Clark, welcome.
Thank you. And Barbara, of course, I have been hearing of your work for many, many years. So good job with that. All the people you've helped.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we both know Norman, right? Norman Deutsch, who's
yes.
Up here in Toronto, fabulous individual. Yeah.
Okay, we're waiting on Paul Madaule and Marla Golden, who are hopefully going to be able to join us. They are planning to join, so we'll give it just another minute or two.
Sounds like things are very successful, like the events, right? Yeah, a lot of interest.
I think so. We were really overwhelmed by the level of interest, and then just so many messages from individuals. And it did make me think about you, Clark, and how many, when we interviewed you, all of the feedback that you got from your book and those personal stories. So I've had the opportunity to get a little glimpse of what you were experiencing with that. And it's been, that's what it's all about, sort of what you said, Barbara, in your interview. It's all about the people that you can help. So I'm thankful for that. That in itself is success.
Yes.
Right. And these stories are so important. Each one is some many are life-changing. And boy, if we can help people to move out of that nightmare, so much the better.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yay. It looks like Mark Watson is about to join in. I think unfortunately he's joined as a participant and not necessarily as a speaker. So Mark, if you'll go in and revisit your how you joined, I think would be great. Please reach out to Emily if you need some help there. Okay, as soon as Mark gets on, we'll go ahead and start. I know Marla was going to try to join, but she had some patients she was seeing, and so I think was on the tail end of that. She might not have been able to get through. Barbara, you mentioned that you're there in Toronto with Dr. Deutsch. Do you have an occasion to work with him professionally in any way?
A number of years ago, we worked together. He became aware of my work through one of his clients, who was married to one of my staff, right? So he got really intrigued. And what I have to say is, I mean, Norman has an incredible intellectual curiosity and growth mindset. So, he approached me and he recognized that some of his clients weren't able to benefit from a therapeutic process because not that they were resisting, therapy or, setting up roadblocks, but cognitively they couldn't make connections, just like the difficulty I had. So they couldn't have insight. So they were really blocked in benefiting from therapy. So in those cases, he referred the clients to me. We did our work to strengthen that cognitive function, and then they were able to benefit from therapy. And we've seen that many, many, many times, that cognitive issues can have an impact on mental health. So that's how we got to know each other. And then we've just stayed in touch. In fact, today I was thinking we've got some fabulous new research coming in from Europe and coming in from the US that I need to share with him. So we stay in touch, absolutely.
We were excited to see that he registered for the summit. I don't know how or when he's participated, but it was a real thrill for us. I was like, I think we are making an impact there. Yeah. Emily, any updates on Mark?
So Mark actually is joined right now as an attendee. So Mark, we can't hear you talk. So if there's a way for you to exit out and try and attempt to come back in, that would be wonderful. And then we're still waiting on the listening center, but I think we could go ahead and get started, Sherry, and I can go into the backstage again and see if I can grab them.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, let's go ahead and let's get started here, and hopefully they can join. There we go. Yeah. Well, I want to open it up to the floor. We certainly have some questions we wanted to ask, but we want to make sure our participants get first dibs on those. So if you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and paste it in the chat, if you will. Let's see here. It looks like, unfortunately, I didn't have that chat function open to everyone there.
We have some questions in the Q&A, Sherry. So we could start with Richard's question to Clark. If you were to rewrite Ghost in hindsight, what would you change?
Most of it I would leave the same, because it does capture the experience in a way that many seem to identify with, and I think that was the most important part. But I certainly would emphasize how visual spatial processing is at the core of what makes us human. Since writing the book, and it just happens, and my work as a cognitive scientist and as an AI professor, I'm becoming even more impressed with how much the visual spatial processing that we do is at the core of almost everything that makes us human. So I would have emphasized that. And there's a toss-up. Do I want to include some of the research that would make the book more acceptable to scholars? And so I might add an addendum to that. And I purposely didn't make it a researchy book, because I didn't want to scare away the people that I thought should most be reading it. But that I think that would be my answer. Possibly put an appendix including research and research directions that are grounded in hard facts and hard science, and possibly emphasize much more that the visual spatial processing affects almost everything in our daily lives.
Yeah, Clark, it's almost like you need to write a book for the professionals and then one for the individuals, because your insights on what you've learned from that, especially as an AI professor, are so profound. I think when we first interviewed, Emily and I stayed on the phone with you, for 2 hours, just talking about your perspectives and insights on that component of it. At least an article. We'd like to see an article from you.
Yeah.
Looks like we have a question from Michael about, Clark, if you've maintained your interest in music.
Oh, absolutely. You see, this is half of my LP collection back there, and I do study every day. And I'm a pretty good AI professor and cognitive scientist, but it for me really is a hobby. And so if I had if I were king of the earth, I would go back to being a musician and spending most of my time studying music. So yes, I maintain it. I was born that way, and I study every day.
Okay, we've got another question here about your batteries, Clark. This one's for you as well. It says, how did Clark increase the capacity of his A, B, and C brain batteries? Did they all increase? Does it work for brain fog and fatigue?
I did see that in one of the chat sessions for one of the sessions that came earlier this week, but I didn't know how to answer that until we got here. And the answer is really quite simple. I didn't do anything to address that. What I did was repair the visual spatial processing through the glasses and the puzzles. And the fact that we found healthy brain tissue to take over this processing solved that problem, so that now I'm very resilient, even because we addressed some of the attention oddities I had even before getting the injury. I'm more energetic. I have better A batteries and B batteries than ever before. So that just came with the treatment for free. Okay. And along with everything else that the brain fog was gone, and the fatigue from just listening to people speak was gone, and the balance issues also disappeared. So yes, my belief is that we got to the root of the problem, fix those by finding healthy brain tissue, and the rest of it, as complicated as the symptoms were and as wide ranging as they were, they all disappeared after fixing the core of the problem. And I hope, of course, that can be true for you as well. And then for many, it has been.
Okay, well, let's welcome Rosalinde Pecino to the panel. And here she is joined by Paul. Welcome, Paul. Thank you both for taking time out to join us.
Sorry to be late. Sorry to be late.
No worries. We've had some questions here for Clark. Let's see. We got another couple of questions here. Let's see.
How about another one for Clark? We've got from Carolyn. How do you know if you are fully recovered? I don't remember what recovered or normal is. P.S. I'm now a patient of Dr. Zielinski and responding well. Also, did you have prisms in your glasses, Clark?
I'm so happy to hear that you're responding well. Yes, I did have prisms in the first 2 glasses, and then not for number 3. And that was a loss for me. That third pair was hard for me. Missing those prisms, I had to do, in Debbie's words, I had to do the work myself, and she was pushing me for that. And then I believe we got the prisms back, or at least mild versions of them in 4, 5, and 6. And so I do have very mild prisms in the glasses that I use now for at least 5 minutes a day, something like that. So the answer to the prisms. Now let's see the original question. So many things going on today. Sherry, remind me.
The original question was,
well-being.
How do you know if you're recovered?
Right, and well-being. So, and I'm sorry, tell me the name again, who was asking?
Carolyn.
Carolyn. So Carolyn, I don't know how it will be for you. I know what many report, but for me, it was relatively obvious. It was just this explosion of, it's like the joy of life returning, that not only could I feel myself being myself again as part of the recovery, but things were working right. So I guess if you had a metaphor, it'd be like driving around in a car that had 2 cylinders that weren't working correctly, and you could hear how struggling. It's hard to get up the hills. And of course, and for humans, we get so tired all the time because it's so hard to get through life, just the simplest things we do during the day. And then the engine gets tuned up and it's humming away like a sewing machine, and life becomes much, much easier. And then, of course, returning to the feeling of being myself, because that had so much disappeared. And I noticed that, we had talks here about the loss of our cells and how hard it is for that, for people who suffer these brain injuries. That came back. So, and I think Carolyn, you said, right, that returned for me, the feeling of who I was. And I think that you would find that the world starts to make sense again. You can feel that your body's operating in the right way. And the constant fatigue from doing simple tasks should start to disappear. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it does take time. And then I think you will know. You'll say, oh, right. I forgot that this is what it's like.
Okay. And I get there's some comments for you in there, Clark. Carolyn says she's getting that feeling now, of course, and she's hoping it continues.
Yes, and it does come back in bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And Sherry, I don't have access. Oh, wait, I do. Here, now that's been activated. Got it. Okay.
Chat. Yeah. Sorry. Barbara, yeah, question for you. Somebody's in here asking about your work with Queensland and the drug addiction and rehabilitation. Let's see. The question was, have students mostly had drug addiction, or what about any eating disorders associated with that? And that's with regards to the Queensland program.
Yes. So the group that we're working with are young adults. So there's a young adult women's program and a young adult men's program, and it's predominantly substance abuse. The individuals that are coming into that program. So, in principle, it could work with, I would imagine, any kind of addiction. I mean, we know, the process of addiction rewires the brain in a negative way. And the work that we're doing with this group is rewiring very critical networks. It's the default mode network, the salience network, and the executive control network. And it's just interesting hearing Clark talk about sense of self. I mean, you can lose sense of self because of a brain injury, but in my case, I never had a sense of self because I was born without the cognitive capacities to develop a sense of self, like very, very profound. I mean, I always viewed myself as a, fractured set of puzzle pieces that never integrated into a whole. So as we're working with this population, they're able to connect, cause and effect. They're able to it impacts the limbic system. So they're able to have a feeling, like a physiological feeling. We get the knots in our stomach, and then it gets associated or attached to an event. So this is what causes me anxiety. And as they improve in that cognitive function, their sense of self changes, their locus of control, their sense of agency in their life, their ability to understand and interpret emotions, not only their own, but those of others. And they're much more amenable to the therapeutic process. I mean, the same thing that Norman Doidge saw when he referred individuals to my work is they can now have insight. And I could have been in therapy, well, I was in therapy for years before I addressed my cognitive difficulty, and I couldn't benefit, right? I was told I was resisting. I was trying really, really hard, but everything felt like a series of random events. There was no coherence in my life. So kind of in a long-winded way, I believe this could be of benefit to other kinds of addiction, and we're working predominantly. We're in our second year of working with individuals with substance abuse, and we're doing research and seeing the significant changes in all sorts of measures and in their ability to benefit from the therapeutic process. So it's a piece of the healing process coming through addiction. And there's a great book called The Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis that talks about the whole, he looks at addiction not in the medical model, but in the neuroplastic model. So anybody that's interested in addiction that's listening, I would highly recommend Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis. He's a neuroscientist that was also an addict. So he writes, from the neuroscience, but also from living many years with an addiction.
Okay, I was just making a note of that, Barbara. I'll put that in.
And Sherry,
we send out.
Let me just comment. I'm in 100% agreement with what Barbara has just said, and but a slightly different way. All the talk therapy in the world isn't going to help if the problem is cognitive, and you have to address that first. And Barbara, you're so articulate, and I've heard exactly what you're saying from so many people.
Yeah, it's back to the hierarchical order that has to occur in these neuroplasticity-based approaches and protocols. You've got to be able to get them to the point where they have the energy, that they have the cognition to be able to go through and strengthen those areas that are weak or need some attunement. So I think that's a consistent message we've heard through almost every speaker that we've had on here. Looks like Barbara, let me see. No, this question is coming in for Paul and Rosalinde. Do you work with concussion patients? I think this is from an individual, Carolyn, as well, who was speaking to Clark earlier. Says, do you work with concussion patients? Since my concussion, I am challenged to process all stimuli, but I have very strong hypercusis, and now from the injury, and normal daily sounds drive me to dangerous brain drain and flight fight type of episodes. Does your center offer therapy programs for that?
Answer would be that we work with concussion. We work with concussion when they are relatively mild, and our work with concussion is not really the center core of our work. Barbara before was talking about sometimes you don't have the sense of self because cognitively you do not have what it takes to have it. And I think our work is more, I would call it developmental. We work with people who have not, mostly with people who have not developed, have not gone through the different step of the developmental stages. And concussion is something that we work because we see sometimes, or people see in the symptoms that they present, some of the symptoms that we describe as the type of issue that improve with the program. And relatively late in our work, I would say in the last 10 years, we have been venturing into helping people, I say, with milder type of concussion. When and where does it work best? It works best when the person who have the concussion tell us that the concussion has amplified something that they already knew about, felt about, or forgot about, because that was earlier in their life when they were at school, etc. And they kind of overcome it. And then bing, the concussion arrives and it's all back to the surface. This is more the people that we help. People that we help with concussion as more people who have processing issues. They basically have what Dr. Deutsch called a noisy brain. They do not really, it's like if they are living their life as before, but now it is in a noisy environment. And the noise doesn't necessarily come from outside, the noise comes from within themselves. This is a good recommendation. The hyperacusia, because the question is specifically hyperacusia, I could not say because of a symptom like that, I will work with this situation. I will be very prudent. I will ask for more questions, even have more, necessitate more background to know if it is a recommendation. We do not always recommend the program for concussion, basically. We do not have that clinical confidence to do that. Perhaps I would say we do not have enough data.
Oh, okay, thank you, Paul. Barbara, another question for you. I'll just read it. Hi, Barbara, you rehabilitated yourself through your own recognition of your dysfunction in your mind. Do you encourage people to assess their own minds to find their dysfunction at all?
Absolutely. I would encourage people. I mean, they can go through, I think the people, probably, Clark and me and other people have come from and I think Paul as well, like from having an experience themselves, right, of struggle. And that has led each of us to find our own path to address the challenges that we had and then take that out into the world to help other people. So I believe that our brain is incredibly complex. There are multiple roads or avenues into stimulating function and improving the functionality of the brain. So, we've each found some that we're using, but there's probably a multiplicity of ways to improve that. So I absolutely, when I travel around and talk to people, I hear all sorts of amazing stories of things that people have created to help themselves. So that certainly is one route. And another route is, find what's out there and find what resonates and seems to be a good fit for you and the challenges you have, because not everybody wants to, go through that work to invent their own process. So either way is absolutely positive.
Clark, did you have a comment? Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's a good segue into a question from Debbie about, how do people determine? We've had a lot of great speakers this week, and people are trying to assess, who is the best fit for them. And oftentimes it's, more than one provider, certainly. And so Debbie's question was to Paul about, how would, and perhaps we should pose it to everyone. What advice do you have for patients who perhaps have an overlap, and a lot of the different providers could be a help. Hopefully I summarized that. Okay.
That's a very good question. And from my perspective, the way I will answer is perhaps explaining a little bit what it is we are really doing, at what level we are working. We are working at the level of perhaps others will say the same, but we really feel that, first of all, we are not teaching anything. We are not working on the, I would say, the cognitive system itself. We are preparing the ground for learning to be possible, or to be easier. In fact, we talk a lot about ease in the work we do, because it's a language which talks to children. Most of the people we help are children or adolescents. And instead of talking about problems, about that they know, I can say that from my own experience. When you have had an history of problem, you don't need anybody to tell you that you have problem. You have heard it all your life, and you know it anyway, which means, what can I hear other than that? Well, what you can hear which got your attention is there is someone behind your problem. There's a person there. And if someone can connect and relate it to that person, you perk up the ears of that person. The second thing is we can make your life easier. And that's connect. And we really believe we can make life easier, because what we really think is that the work we do is, yes, it is at the level of the brain. I'm totally aware of that, supporting it, because everything finishes up at the brain. But we have to understand that the brain depends very much of what it receives, which means that the brain is very dependent of our sensory system, of what we hear, of what we see, of what we sense, of what we experience through our sense. Let's take the example of, and it's not even an auditory example, it's a visual example of Dalton. The guy who was with a very, very high IQ, but he was seeing blue, green, or vice versa. The notion of the color he could not perceive was impossible. Okay, Dr. Tomatis, my mentor, was saying, very much of a Frenchman, how can you explain champagne if you do not taste it? And very often what we are trying to do in the educational system through educational tools, special education, and some form of, I would say, traditional therapies, is to make people understand the taste of champagne without having the taste buds which permit them to feel champagne. Okay, and that means that it's going to take a huge cognitive real estate, brain real estate, to really try to understand that. If there is anything you can do to make the taste of champagne to come, the bubblies or whatever its champagne tastes like, you are making a difference, which is going to be transmitted as, it makes my life easier. That makes sense. It's starting to feel like something I can experience. And then it becomes more interesting, and then it becomes more motivating. What I mean, and that's my way of answering the question, that if you have someone who is not able to test champagne, if he's not, you can see them having a hard time relating to school, lost. I'm talking about learning disability for now, just to kind of give a frame. Lost interest, do not want to really talk about school, about find ways to get the interest in other area of what they need to do because of the difficulties they have. I think they are good candidate for our program. If you have someone who is very motivated, but very frustrated because they cannot make it, like those who say, the teacher saying they work very hard, but doesn't make it, they also may be a good candidate. But we need, of course, to to have more information to know if there is something which is not received properly in to make the processing of the information possible.
And one point just to add on, Debbie, to your question, and I think which is a great benefit of this event, is we're trying to get all of the providers to know each other and be aware of each other's services, so that if you reach out to, say, Donnelly Marcus, or you reach out to Barbara, if you're not a good fit for them, they can help guide you to which one of these providers may be helpful, or you may be a great fit for them, but they may say, we also recommend you see A, B, and C. And so I think, you know, for Barbara and Paul and Clark and everyone, you know, that's the role that our organization is trying to play, to bring everyone together, which will ultimately help benefit patients, so that if they find one of you, they can find all of you. So hopefully, Debbie, that helps.
And Emily, I have a comment.
Yeah.
First, I do want to say I'm very sympathetic to how hard it is to who you choose, because usually finances are limited, and then of course your resources to do the new thing, to go find somebody and start up with them, it has to be hoarded, because you only have so much of that to go around. And if you choose badly, then it's worse. So I am very sympathetic to that problem. That's why I do applaud Emily and Sherry, what you are doing, because a critical element of this is when one practitioner knows to refer you also to someone else. When I went to see Donnelly, for example, she immediately says, I can handle this, but I want you to see Debbie Zielinski, because then we can handle it faster together. And I thought, that's great. You know, and Donnelly, of course, will do this all the time to recommend other people that she thinks may be right there with this particular problem, that they could do better than she could, although she tends to be very good at mastering the show and getting the right things done at the right time. And Paul, you had mentioned, of course, how critical the auditory processing is. And I know from looking at your website that you say this is linked to ADHD and autism spectrum disorders, and so many of these. And I completely agree. And relevant to this discussion, the question that was just asked is that, of course, all of this is linked. I know, for example, that I think it's somewhere between 95 and 90%, 95 and 97% of people almost immediately translate auditory information into visual information. So when I say a green monkey, you're seeing green and you're seeing monkeys, or your uncle, you're seeing your uncle's face. And so many auditory processing difficulties are going to be visual in nature. And you could treat them either by treating the auditory input and using that, or treating the visual input to get the visual centers working correctly, so that now you can hear correctly. And it works the other way around too, that, for example, if you are hear something then that primes you for seeing the color yellow, then you're going to change the way you see the world. That will include being primed to see yellow. So all of this, of course, is integrated, not to mention with balance information and so on. So when choosing a practitioner, keep in mind that all of this is linked. And if your problem is hearing, it might be that you need to treat your vision. And if your visual spatial information is not working correctly, it may actually be linked in some kind of auditory problem that is not correctly being integrated with the visual spatial processing that's at the core of your thinking. So I just thought I would comment on that. One, you have my sympathy. It's a hard problem. Two, thank you, Sherry and Emily, for getting people to talk together, which of course is needed. And you would want a practitioner that knows who else has something to offer, possibly better than what they have to offer. And three, these all work together. These systems, as was part of Debbie Zielinski's talk, is that these systems are all highly integrated. Of course, my feeling, having lived through it from one perspective, is that the visual spatial processing is a crucial element that links all of this together. That's just one opinion. So thank you for letting me add my 2 cents here.
Thanks, Clark.
Yeah. Barbara, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think I agree with everything everybody said. I mean, Paul knows that I've sent people to him in Toronto. Like I believe, you know, we're complex beings, and there's no one size fits all. That's what I would caution. If somebody goes to, you know, to get support and help, and that individual says, you know, I'm the way and the answer, and there's no other possibilities out there, I would suggest that's a red flag, because, you know, if we're really trying to be of service to the clients that we're working with, it's really deeply understanding them, trying to deeply understand what is driving, you know, the symptoms that we're seeing, and then looking at what do we think is the best approach. And it could be multiple people. Like, you know, as I said, we've had students that are absolutely need Paul's work, you know, before they can come in, you know, and do our work. There's some individuals that need some therapeutic work before they can come in and do our work. Like, it's really what is, you know, best going to serve the needs of that individual. And that could be a multi-pronged approach. And I am deeply appreciative, you know, to Sherry and Emily for what you're doing, because now I'm going to know more about what's out there as well that I can refer people to, and not just learning difficulties. I mean, I've used Marla Golden's work. You know, I have a chronic pain condition that actually has affected my brain. They see cell death in my brain as a result of the stress of, you know, having lived for 30 plus years with unremitting chronic pain. And it was remarkable what her work did for me. And actually it was Norman that sent me to work with her, Norman Deutsch, right? So to me, neuroplasticity is so promising in that it can address all sorts of conditions that we thought were untreatable before. We just had to live with. You know, I grew up and I was told basically in grade 1, you know, you're never going to amount to much, you know, just accept your limitations. Your whole life is going to be a struggle. And we know that's not the case. And there are multiple people doing amazing work, and let's everybody benefit from the different aspects, you know, of the work that's out there. And the other piece of advice I would give is, if you don't, you know, if you go to someone to get treatment and you don't see yourself in what they're saying or in the kinds of problems they're describing, then probably it's not a good fit. Like, you know, you need to see yourself in what they're addressing for it to be a good fit. It could be a good fit for somebody else, but not necessarily for you.
Yeah, and if I could just maybe add to that too, I mean, one of the things that I've heard from most every one of the speakers is that you're going to know within a week to 2 weeks whether what that provider is doing for you is going to have some impact, because it's very specific and very targeted. And so I think, Clark, in your experience, right, it was like within 2 days, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know it was very quick. And so if you try something and it's not working, don't give up hope, but realize that you should see maybe not complete improvement. That's not what I'm saying here, but that you will see some sort of beginnings of improvement within a very short time, you know, within a couple of weeks or a month or so.
Plus, a good question to ask yourself is this person listening to me? Because many people have an agenda that they believe in, it works well, but that's kind of their thing, is the agenda, as opposed to who are you? And if I have something to offer, I will know how to match that with who you are. But if they're not listening closely to who you are, that's probably a flag you should be concerned about. I mean, as a rule of thumb. So sometimes people are super busy and they already know the answer, and they only had a little bit of time because there are 5 other people waiting to see them. And maybe you don't feel that magic connection right there, but it is probably going to become apparent. Are they tuned into what's actually happening with me?
Yeah, good feedback.
I agree with this. I think that real clinical work is to adapt whatever technique you are using or set of technique within a context which is much wider. What else, which other techniques, which other help is around for that specific person, which means that the real skill of the clinician is to really know who is this person and what kind of issue and what kind of context this issue are presented. How many times do we see, for example, child or an adolescent who could be a candidate, but he's not in the headspace to be a candidate? He's too busy to fight with his parents, too busy to deal with other issues which are more important at this moment, which means to say, yes, he's a candidate, but go and see Deborah Zelinsky first, or do this first, and then you come back. And you know, Barbara, as you say, we have been working for many years together, and often the combination of two techniques is, and you know, it's relatively easy for us talking about Barbara and us, because we are in the same city. The combination of two techniques can be very helpful for some people. We never really present our work as this is it. It is a starting point of something, and along the way we will discuss what else could be done.
Yeah, that I like that answer, Paul, because it is a starting point. And I think that's kind of critical in answer of this question, right? You got to start somewhere. You make the best guess and with your care team on where to start, but that may not be the end of it, right? You may have to go and try some additional practitioners or try a different approach. And just be persistent, I think, is the message for that. And start somewhere, and that doesn't try, keep going if you can.
And one quick comment just on that is, I think also depending on where you are in your recovery, you also need different teams. So for example, in my first year, you know, I was focused on certain things that were very different than, you know, my third year. And so or maybe, you know, I didn't have a neurologist, you know, in year this or this, but maybe a neurologist is helpful in some year. And so I think, it's not always the same team through the entire journey, but that team can kind of evolve as your healing and your needs evolve. So just wanted to make that point too.
That's a good point.
And Sherry, I see just a couple of comments. Do I have just a minute here?
Sure.
Oh, so this is just briefly, it's a theme that Michael, you raised, if I understand what you wrote here in the chat room, and then Carolyn also to some degree, is that a relatively standard traditional approach for these head injuries is learn to live with your symptoms because nobody ever recovers from them. And we do adapt. We do learn to adapt and become the new person and get by. But it is my experience and the experience of many others that may not be the final answer, that in fact, the brain does have ways to change and can find those pieces of us that are still there, but are just not available to us. If this is kind of a distant metaphor, but let me use it anyway. We'll see if I can make it work. Donnelly Marcus and Debbie Zelinsky do both talk about the idea of our peripheral processing, which sets the context for our world, and then the center vision, which is where we're focusing. And that one thing that can go wrong is that the peripheral processing, including all of the non-image forming retinal processing that comes from the periphery, is damaged and it's not working correctly. But another thing that could happen, and this is where the metaphor comes in, is that the peripheral vision is working correctly and the center vision is more or less working correctly, but it's the communication between the two that has broken down. And it's not always easy to tell, is the peripheral processing, has it gone missing, or is it not operating correctly in the way it communicates with the center vision? And so the metaphor is that it could also be the case that those parts of you that are mourned as having been lost, and to some degree, we can't quite get what's missing, because if we could understand what was missing, then we could have it again. It's our inability to be that person, even to the extent of understanding what is gone, that might still be there if we can find a way to get to it and integrate it with the rest of our sense of self and so on. So I don't know. Of course, every case is different. These are terribly hard cases that Barbara and Paul and everybody who's been here working with. But personally, I wouldn't give up on the possibility that that integration can come back, that it might still be there years later, decade later, that it can be there, and the brain might find a way to link to it and bring it back. So it's just a message that we don't know. We don't know, and we're learning so much about the brain now every year. If you go to the neuroscience conference, and it's like a whole city has, sprung to life for a week with the massive numbers of people all working on tiniest parts of the brain and figuring out how they work, that I think there's hope for throughout life that this may come back. And I don't know in practical ways whether that's useful, but I just want to comment that I think it might still come back, and it has for people on occasion.
Okay, thank you, Clark. We got a question, Barbara, for you, and it's really around the applications for the Arrowsmith program in the future. I think they're wondering what sort of, with all of the changes that are happening in neuroplasticity and research and development, what applications for the cognitive exercises that you're developing do you see this being applied to in the future, maybe in the next 5-year time frame?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, what I'm really excited about is I call it putting the brain in education. I mean, you know, we kind of think that the brain is in education, you know, and it is, because we all have a brain and we go to school. But it's really, if you look at, and I travel around the world and I visit schools, it's not really part of integrated into curriculum, right? And so I've developed a model, I call it the whole cohort, which just means every student in a grade, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, is doing a developmentally appropriate cognitive exercise. So in grade 1, they're working on motor planning, which is related to eye tracking and reading, and motor planning in writing. Grade 2, they're working on the visual system in the left hemisphere that's related to holding visual images of symbol patterns, which is critical for reading, for spelling, any kind of visual template learning. Grade 3, we add quantification sense, which is the I think the interparietal sulcus, which is related to understanding quantification, understanding number. Grade 4, we're doing reasoning, and it's really exciting. I just got data from Madrid. We're in a school, elementary school, 350 students in Spain doing this program, and I just visited them a few weeks ago, and I'm going to visit them in a couple of weeks. And we're actually seeing, we did a study where the 41 students in grade 3 that were working on one of the cognitive exercises and compared them to 40 students in traditional academic classes, just doing regular things. And we found processing speed, selective attention significantly improve in that group compared to kids doing regular academic curriculum. So where do I see the future of this work? It should just be integrated into every classroom around the world. That would, people like me that, you know, went through all of my schooling with severe learning difficulties. I attempted suicide at age 13. You know, they would have been addressed as a normal part of curriculum. Like, everyone can benefit from cognitive enhancement. And students without learning difficulties, students with learning difficulties, you know, the World Economic Forum has identified the 21st century skills. What do we need to be successful in the future? We don't know today what in 20 years from now are going to be the demands that are required. So what I think is required is a brain with cognitive reserve, cognitive resources that allows that individual to meet any kind of challenges that are going to come their way 20 years down the road. So I'm really excited about that. We are doing it in Madrid. We're doing it in Wellington in New Zealand. We're gathering the data. And I want to see that. I would love to see that in every school. And then having a cognitive classroom for some students in the school that need, you know, some more work, you know, that one period a day isn't going to be sufficient. So, and then there's the application. I think you had Mark Watson on here presenting from ABI Wellness on the west coast of Canada, and he's taking the work and working with individuals with traumatic brain injury. They're doing a research study at Harvard, and I think they're looking at another one at Vanderbilt. Like, I think, speaking to what Clark said, our brain is incredibly neuroplastic. Whether the challenges are because we're born with those, like I was, it wasn't trauma in the sense, I don't believe my mother dropped me on my head. I don't think so. But, you know, I was born with very, very significant learning difficulties. And I've worked with people with traumatic injury that aren't as severe as what I had. Or whether it is a traumatic injury, the brain is neuroplastic. And if we can understand, like, how do we harness those principles and drive cognitive change, we can, you know, transform the lives of the people that we're working with. And I think that's why all of us are here. You know, that's our motivation, is to you know, I talk about freeing energy to dance with the universe. Like it's opening up possibilities for these individuals to engage with the world, whether it's loving music, whatever it is, allows people to engage. So I want to see this in every school around the world. And a lot of these exercises are language agnostic. So it doesn't matter that those students in Madrid speak Spanish. You know, the program doesn't require language to do it. So that's, yeah, I mean, in a long-winded way, I'm very passionate about this. And that's what I would like to see. We go to school to learn, we learn with our brain. Let's put the brain into the equation.
Yeah, I've sent your interview to the school where my children attend, Barbara. I'm on a mission to get you integrated into there. I have a question for just the full panel, whoever it might who might be best to answer it. With the transition to screens, and I know Dr. Zielinski spoke about this in hers, is there's a huge shift, right, in the way we use our visual spatial processing because we're on screens so much. Have you seen any change in, have you adapted your programs for that at all over the last, 10 years or so? Anybody?
I'll jump in for a moment. I mean, I don't know that it screens so much. I've seen a big difference in the challenges that present themselves in my work over, I started this work, gosh, I'll date myself, in 1978. And at that time I was reading Laurie's work. I was reading higher cortical functions in man, and there was a whole section on the prefrontal cortex, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I want to see people with this difficulty, this executive functioning. And probably over, the first 10 or 15 years of my work, maybe I saw a handful of people with that difficulty. And again, I'm working with people with learning difficulties, not traumatic brain injury at that time. Now, I would say 75% of the people that I work with have, obviously a combination of difficulties, but executive functioning is a problem. And if we think about the prefrontal cortex, it's that part of the brain that digs into things, that problem solves, that wants a meaty problem to try to figure out. And so I wonder if all this making things into sound bites, like making things like pre-digested, making things too easy, like how often do we hear, oh, we shouldn't ask so-and-so to do this because it's a bit of a challenge. So do I know for certain that's why I'm seeing more individuals with executive functioning, problem solving, planning, organizing difficulties? I can't say, but I do wonder what's changed over those 40 plus years. I think we've made things a little too simple, and it's not stretching the prefrontal cortex. So that's my thought.
Yeah.
I think I have some thoughts too. When I starting with myself, it was very important to know how to read, or to spell, or to write. Now all those things can be done automatically. Someone doesn't have to be a real good speller in order to write a letter which looks okay from a spelling point of view. Young people now have their own way of learning, of communicating with each other, where spelling is totally out of the window. On another hand, though, I am very pleased that despite of the difficulty I've had, my teacher had the education I received had forced me to compose a phrase, a sentence, from the beginning to the end, despite of the difficulties that I had, because I really believe, I am one of these believers that our thinking is very much influenced by how we express ourselves. Of course, you can turn it around, and I think both way of looking at it work, because it's a loop. And this loop seems to be little by little diminished when children are not really trained to think in an organized, when there is more and more sound bites, small small way of expressing yourself. It's good for everyday communication, but we see, I mean, I've been like Barbara, started in Toronto in 1978, which means quite a few years ago. And I have seen an increase of what we are calling ADHD now. Doesn't mean that it didn't exist before. We were not diagnosing it the same way, and I agree with all this. But the increase is so incredible. Particularly the part of ADHD which has to do with what do you call it? No, the other one, the jumping the gun, impulsivity. Impulsivity is really, my opinion, is really growing. People, what is impulsivity? Is that you are acting before you can think, which means that the loops which permit you to really put into your mind perhaps a little sentence which tell you what to do at this moment or at this moment is not there anymore. I think it has really a lot to do with the way, not education, I'm not talking about education here, but social media, the way kids communicate with each other, and there is not enough thinking. It's just acting.
Everything is instantaneous today.
Exactly. And
instant gratification,
instant gratification, exactly. And I think that is, for me, one of the big difference between kids 30 years ago and kids now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that, Paul. Emily, I don't see any other questions out there. Did I miss anything?
I think we might have missed one from Michael that was going back to kind of a sense of self.
Okay.
He was asking all the speakers and he said, oh, sorry, Richard, not Michael, my bad. The sense of self can be identified as the body or the emotions or the thoughts, but not all of them can be identified at the same time. Which is self, or are they all illusions of the mind? So that's a deep question. Who wants to start off with that? Clark, maybe?
Sure. And I want to know, I have 100 decibel leaf blower pair running outside the window. Can you hear my voice?
Yeah.
It's great.
Okay. Well, it will come. The sense of self is a huge one from, the people that write to me. And of course, for me, it was important also. If you ask me, I'd say, well, yes, I'm an alien being. I'm not human anymore. And this is so common. I think it goes even deeper than the list that was just mentioned. And this comes down to this even spatial processing, where we end and where the rest of the world begins. When you lose that, or the idea of, well, I refer to a triangle sometime, that there may be two other people in the room and we relate to them, but if we can't get a triangle anymore, we don't see how we fit into this social relationship. And that's at a much deeper level than the stories we create from these, which are emotion, how we approach emotions and how we feel about ourselves and so on. And if, as Barbara had said so eloquently earlier, if this cognitive apparatus is not working correctly, all of the things that those basic symbols of thought that make us human are also going to go awry. So I would say don't leave out the part that is the basic building blocks of everything that you just described, because those are pretty much high-level thoughts of a description of who we are as people and what are those thoughts constructed of. If you can hear me, I have a comment about the previous question. Would that be all right, about the online? I'm not a practitioner, as you know, so I don't have to deal with the problems of that at a therapeutic level, but I am an educator. And there are a couple of things that I've noticed very prominently in my relationship to my students when we have gone online. First thing is that a lot of people who are presenting educational material are using very poor sound. And so Paul and Rosalinde, I think you're probably going to be jumping. I said, yes,
You're right.
Not only has it been digitized, which I will wave the flag around boldly and say it's damaged if it's been digitized. You are not getting the full spectrum of what humans are able to perceive, or you're getting it, but it's all wrong in the upper resonance areas. But more importantly, the sound is echoing around the room, and it's very fatiguing to pull the meaning and turn that into the symbols of thought out of the sound signal. And so people tune out, and they're just not getting the message, or they're not. They're just leaving the session early because it's too tiring, and they don't think of it that way. They think of it as, well, I want to do something else. So sound signal is huge. And if we tend to think, well, is the picture clear? It's not the picture we need in education systems. It's good, high quality sound that allows us to create the images intended by the person who's speaking. A second thing is that I think we have a loss of the stories in which people encode information, including complex information about chemical bonds in a chemistry class. Is that in class, the story created is the material we're learning and us in the classroom interacting in some way with the people around us, the room, and the teacher. And when it's gone strictly to the screen, especially when people's faces are not present, we lose that story. And to be a little bit more detailed, I believe that the way this ends up being encoded in the hippocampus is a story, and then later over time translated into deeper meaning in the neocortex, that the original story was not encoded in the way that we get live. And thus, in the end result, what we have actually learned from it in useful logical ways in the neocortex is also then diminished. So I think there's that loss. And the idea is that when we are present, even if we're having faces and interaction on Zoom, I think that's pretty good, that we have a sense of the story of us being here and we're in the story. But when we get too far removed from that, it's someone else's story, we're not in it, and we encode it differently, even though we're talking about physics or chemistry. And then the last thing, of course, is we miss a lot of the subtle social cues that we're really good at. So
I cannot agree more with you on the auditory end of receiving a message. It has always been. Digitalization is perhaps the last symptom, but it has always been that the sound quality. I remember in Paris in the 70s, people were spending a lot of money on developing language labs. You know, you with earphones, and you speak and you listen and you learn language like this. The problem was that people at the time, people were using cassette tapes. The cassette tapes were used hundreds of times. They were transparent at the end, and they still were using them, which means that all the overtones, all the harmonics, which makes a difference between an A and an O and an A and here, everything was completely erased, which means that what you are creating is a bunch of students trying to learn a new language with what I call a listening problem. Because a listening problem is exactly that. A listening problem is receiving an information with an attuning of the radio receptor, if I want to, between two channels. Not, you know, you get a lot of but you don't really get a lot of message. And that is something which has been kept on and on and on and on. And you are referring to now the digitalization sounds, which sounds like, for me, it sounds like pins. Yeah, exactly. And how do you want to invite all kinds of sound, embrace the listener? Okay, and even music is beautiful, but you have to transmit it in a way which is going to convey it. And particularly voices and language of the teacher. If it goes because the sound system is not good, forget about it. The children are not going to learn. They're going to daydream, or they're going to, you know.
So not to get on a, you know, the pedestal here, but I can say this very quickly to follow up on what Paul has just said, is when we look at Fourier transform theory and so on, what you're going to hear is that digital sound at the CD quality level is perfect sound, because humans can't hear above 22 kilohertz. So if you sample at 44 kilohertz, it's going to be fine. You get all of anything that's meaningful to humans. But that's not true. I can hear absolutely that that's not true. And then, but beyond what I can hear, and probably what Paul and Rosalinde can hear, is a more modern research showing that the hair cells in our ears, which we use for hearing, respond to frequencies that are vastly higher. I mean, we're even looking at, like, I don't know what, X-ray frequency. I mean, just inventing the high ranges, but well beyond what we are talking about as part of the human hearing. And so in the same way that Debbie Zielinski talks about non-image forming retinal processing that's very important to us as human beings, that's coming in through our eyes, and we don't see it, in the same way, all of this high, very high frequency information with great subtlety in it that has kept us alive as a species for, a million years, is not captured or not captured correctly in the ways that we're currently digitizing sound, is my belief about it. And yet we know that our hair cells do respond to sounds in those frequencies. So we may not hear it, but that doesn't mean that our brain is not processing it.
Exactly. What the brain hears is not 100% what we consciously think what we think we hear. It's two different things. I can say that because when I was diagnosed with a difficulty, which was at the cause of many of my learning disability, and when I was told that it has to do with the way my ear worked, because at the time we were not talking about processing and so on, I was the first surprised, because I thought if I had something which worked, it was my hearing. The thing is that I was in my, I was in, that's all that I knew. It was but when things started changing, I realized that in fact I was not, the word was not hearing, but I was not receiving with the clarity and the richness of the information coming. It was thin, if you want. Like people who are on the phone all day, imagine someone who is born with a telephone receptor on his head. That's what he thinks that the world is, the auditory world is. Well, the telephone cuts the lower frequencies, the higher frequency, to a point that when you want to give a name to someone through a phone, you have to say A like apple, B like whatever, because the phonemes are not clear if they are not put together in a context, which is a word, assuming that you understand that word, which means assuming that you understand this language. And if you have a difficulty with processing, the assumption is wrong. You might not understand the word. And then when it's a sentence is a quick succession of words, you have to have your brain constantly trying to make up, fill up the gaps in order to get at the end of the 30 seconds, the meaning of what has been said. You might have it, you might think that you had it and misinterpret it, or you might gone somewhere in your mind which has nothing to do with which is nowhere close to what the person is telling you.
Right. And of course, those with head injuries have to deal with this very greatly magnified, is they're trying to interpret what has been said. They're trying to buffer that before to try and process it, and at the same time listen to what's coming in, and it just all breaks down in 5 or 10 minutes. So Sherry, if your kids are studying online, make sure that the school district is spending more than 12 cents on their microphones, and maybe attending to some sound deadening in the classrooms, because this is going to be much more important really than even the quality of the video.
The acoustic of a room, the acoustic
Yes.
of the classroom, which very often bounce like if you are in a station,
Yes.
or with the noise of air conditioning. That's terrible. This is sounds which put you asleep. The echoing. This is basically provoking auditory delayed processing, which is known as one of the main causes of learning disabilities.
Right. And listen to what he is saying. We are inflicting learning disabilities on the normal population.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
That there's a question in the chat here about digital apps being used for rehabilitation. Then is that a clear challenge, and are those effective then, based on what you're saying about the sound processing? So the question was, are digital apps that are using sound for brain rehabilitation effective?
Well, I'll just answer very quickly that they may be very effective, and we would hope that researchers are getting data and they can be quite helpful. And digital sound is pretty good in a lot of ways nowadays, certainly better than it was when it first came out. My own feeling, there's a lot that's going to be wrong with it because it's been digitized, and our brains are highly, highly developed for picking up all of this spatial information about the shape of the room and where someone's positioned in space around us. And the meaning of the sound that's coming in as threat or helpful, or how it relates to something else. And all of that has to do with how this sound information is bouncing around in the room in relation to us and in relation to the echoing in our own skulls. And that's going to be wrong when it's digitized, but that doesn't mean that these apps couldn't be very helpful. It just means that there's probably room for improvement if we could make them analog.
Right. And it's also the way you receive the digitized information in your ears, the quality of the sound equipment you are using. Very often, that is there is where you are losing a lot of quality. Like, for example, right now, when I'm hearing you from the loudspeaker, which is hidden somewhere on the Apple, the Mac Airs that we are using, it doesn't reproduce the whole, even if it is digital, and of course it is digital, it doesn't reproduce everything which is coming from your voice, which means that a quality of a headphones can make a big difference.
Interesting.
Let me, I'm sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
Yeah, or the quality of an amplifier that you put at the exit of your TV, of your computer, which is going to give a bigger, more body to the sound, which is going to make it more what a sound should be, closer to what it should be. It will not correct all the difficulty with digital sounds, but it will make it better. Which means that think of the quality of how, what can you do at the output.
I wanted to take, excuse me, just a minute here and welcome Dr. Marla Golden to the session. So if anybody, if you'll, just as a reminder, Dr. Golden was speaking on persistent pain and is an expert in that. If you have any questions for her, please do go ahead and put those in the chat. And Emily?
Yeah, I think we have a question from Marla from earlier. How has your work been influenced by EMDR and MBSR? Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute. Marla, you're on mute.
Isn't that always the way? Yeah. I try to be respectful and mute my own background noise if there is some from, my surroundings. But anyway, EMDR is an interesting technique. I'm not sure I know what the second acronym is, but EMDR has some elements within it that we utilize with respect to alternate input to the brain and the body to try, the basic premise is to break up the association between the psychological aspects of someone's pain, anxiety, fear, whatever they may be experiencing, and the actual physical manifestation of that they're experiencing. And so our program focuses on repetitive, soothing, and stimulating, or yet stimulating input. And I think that we can draw from some of the ways that EMDR is done now to kind of incorporate that type of work into our program, such that if someone is having a very bad time with their pain and it is bringing in, and it's almost like a natural consequence of pain is to have that anxiety, they can utilize techniques with tapping or alternate tapping while they're talking about their pain, or doing other neuroplastic techniques to try to reverse or rewire away from that pain. And so it's touch. I mean, if you use it as an alternate tapping on the legs or the soles of the feet on the floor, that's input, right? That's input to the brain. And so it kind of draws a little bit from that alternating input, but it's about the repetition and it's about that stimulating type of input to the brain to try to reverse that process of persistent pain.
Dr. Golden, the person who asked that question, Richard, he defined that acronym MBSR as mindfulness-based stress reduction. He said he felt like your earlier description was maybe a combination of MBSR and the other acronym. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
Well, I didn't really study them in terms of making them components of the program initially, but like I said, I mean, I have seen and found out and learned more about different techniques and seen how elements of them are almost incorporated in what we do. But it was something I learned about after rather than before to make it a part of the program, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We had a question earlier, Dr. Golden, too, about comparing what you're doing to biofeedback and how is that similar?
I think with biofeedback, it's about paying attention to the way our bodies behave or tuning into certain aspects of what we're feeling in response to a situation or a painful episode, whatever the case may be. If someone is anxious, then biofeedback can help people identify what they're actually feeling and how that's manifesting in their body. So things like heart rate or, you know, their respiratory rate and those kinds of things. And then working with that, that understanding, that identification and understanding within the biofeedback system is how someone can harness and take control of their own bodily functions and responses, if you will, to certain stimuli, to move away from that place or to take themselves out of that place. And so, again, I think we all intersect or overlap in some ways, but our program is more about that experience of persistent pain and using that as our trigger to do something pleasurable that will be soothing to the brain and the body, the person, in response to that pain, using the pain as a signal and an opportunity rather than something that, you know, puts us into that fight flight place. So it's about harnessing and recognizing that pain as a signal to do something that's nicer for your brain and your body, to try to wire away from that.
And there another question around that is it comparable to Pavlov, sort of the ringing of the bell?
In some aspects, probably so. I mean, because that is about patterning, that is about repetition, that is about neuroplasticity. If you think about it, those responses in those dogs was because of the exposure to a certain type of signaling repetitively. So that's a basic tenet, you know, that the brain's response to anything we do repetitively, including our unconscious firing of pain signals, that's what neuroplasticity is. That's what changes our brains. So that is, you know, a basic tenet.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to be mindful of time here. We've got about 10 more minutes. And so please go ahead and get your questions in if you do have anything else. We have one question here for you. Let me see. I just lost the place of it. It was
Me?
oh no, it's Paul. I'm sorry. It's for
Oh.
Paul and Rosalinde. How much has the incorporation of bone conduction transducers in your program changed over the decades?
Well, it's a long time that there is a lot of talk about bone conduction these days. But I have to say, the groundwork on bone conduction that I've been witnessing through my mentor, Dr. Tomatis, was done in the mid-70s, where his idea was to, and that has been done, in fact, but his idea was to transmit the information not just to the ears, but through the body, through bone conductors. transducers. And then he realized something interesting is that if you can take a bone conductor is a little vibrator that you put on either the mastoid, on a mastoid bone. You can even put it on top of the head. It also works very well if you put it on teeth because it's hard. It makes you sound, it makes ears a sound like if it is a normal sound. It's an interesting phenomenon. And Tomatis was interested in informing the body. That was his idea of listening is not just a matter of the ears. The whole body listen. And his idea is that the sound information, when it reaches through our body, and then if we are interested in it, if it means something for us, if it packs us up, we are going to start listening to it. The idea is the rabbit, like a rabbit hears a sound, you see a change of posture, movement of the ears, and then you have his attention. Well, we are a little bit like that. We have the same phenomenon going on. What he found is that some people were receiving sound without being informed, which means that they were received and without preparation, which means that they were often received like if you want an image, like a punch in the face. When you tell a child, do something, sometimes you have an overreaction. And you don't understand why, because it's not, the tone of your voice was okay and so on, but it doesn't seem to like what he hears, not from a content point of view, but a delivery point of view. What Tomatis was saying is that the shock absorber, the preparation of the system to receive that sound is not working well. And that is where he started the idea of bone conduction. I'm going to make the story very short. We have been using, since we are in Toronto, we have been using bone conduction systematically with basically every client we meet. We find that it has this kind of because sound stimulation sometimes through the equipment we use a system of what we call gates, can be sometimes by some people who are sensitive, felt a little bit aggressive. Bone conduction has a regulating effect. It makes the sound more rounded, more full, more ready to be heard, if you want. Personally, I have done all my program without bone conduction, and it worked for me, which means that if there is no bone conduction in some cases, I'm not going to say, well, we're not going to get results. But if we can do the program with bone conductors, now what we do is that we put the bone conductor inside the headphones, in the pad, around the headphones. We put the headsets, we put the two little transmitter on both sides. People don't even know that they are there. It sounds like a normal sound, but it has this kind of fuller and better preparation of the listening process, if you want. Which means that we are using it, we like it. It's very rare that we decide not to use it. People who have extreme sound sensitivity sometimes, because we are very prudent, we might say, okay, we're going to try without, and then we're going to introduce it little by little. But most of the time, we use it with both. We use the sound stimulation that we send is received with both ears, with both air and bone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Clark, a couple of questions now for you. Yeah.
I was just going to comment real quickly on the use of sound and therapeutic sound for patients with pain. And I agree, as someone with a very sensitive brain, we have to be very careful. I had a sensitive brain from the time I was a child and even before I had encephalitis, but noticed it more and more after that. But in our program, we did a lot of research into Apkarian's work on the default mode network, which is the natural harmonic rhythm of the brain. And he actually showed that with things like persistent pain processes, the rhythm became altered and became chaotic. And we created a series of sound files, as we call them, using varying frequencies of tuning forks and Tibetan bowls for people to listen to. And they're very soothing, very calming, although I will say I can't tolerate the sound from a very large bowl. It's almost too disturbing to my body and brain. So I think we still have to pick and choose what works best for us. But in terms of using sound and vibration, we also incorporate the use of those tools on the body. And there is research to show that the vibration moves through the water in the cells. Our bodies are mostly water. And what that does is it creates a wave motion. It deforms the cell membranes, and that actually can change gene expression. It can change how people react, and it can absolutely alter and interrupt pain signaling. And so people find it very soothing. Sometimes we would have them put their feet on these speakers that were like hockey pucks, if you will, but they emitted sound and vibration, and they found that very soothing. Other times we would utilize different frequency tuning forks on the body. You can use them along acupuncture meridian points. There's a system called acutonics. And so there is really a place for sound and vibration for the use of and to alter persistent pain states. But in general, it can be very calming. I will agree, though, that you have to be careful to know what your own tolerance is and to find just that right frequency that works for you and is soothing to you.
And can I just say a
Thanks.
comment? I benefited from that work that Marla's talking about with the tuning forks. Like it had a huge impact on reducing pain, and I think retraining my brain and my relationship to pain. So definitely, and I believe at a cellular level, so made a huge difference.
I'm
Yeah,
so glad to hear that.
There's a question in the chat about that, about attitude, really, with regards to pain and with brain injury. And I think it was from Richard, who recovered from his brain injury with using some items on the web and did it all himself. And he said he feels like attitude was really 50% of it. His attitudes towards healing, his attitudes towards the condition itself. And I know, Dr. Golden, you spoke about that in your presentation, but are there any other thoughts around the attitude and the positivity and the impact that makes? Maybe you can talk about how you've seen that in your patient population. Marla, you're on mute again.
I keep doing it. In terms of a person's attitude going into a treatment session, or in terms of how that particular treatment can change their attitude?
Well, I think it's both, right? Because and as Richard was stating, it was his attitude that he can get better. He knows that if he keeps trying, even if that one particular process didn't work, it was his attitude towards that. And so his overall well-being, as well as the emphasis of that specific treatment.
Our thoughts and beliefs about how well or how ill we are and how well or how poorly we will respond absolutely set the stage for how well or how poorly we will respond. If we message ourselves, whether it's through our thoughts or saying it out loud, making statements like, "This will never help me. I don't believe this can help. I'll never be any better." Your brain will hear you, and it's a wonderful organ, and it makes it so. And so I would encourage anybody to at least imagine the possibility that something could help, even the slightest amount, or change something, shift something that will open the door for something else. On the flip side, any relief of pain or problems, whatever they may be, have got to improve someone's attitude towards life, because that's a positive thing, right? So yeah, I would say have that good attitude, or at least being open just open to something. If it's not going to hurt you or harm you in any way, then why not try it? Why not be open to it? I will say that with our method, it is not something that you try once and say, oh, didn't work. It is about doing it and incorporating it into your life.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got one last question here, and because we're running up on our deadline here, and this one is for you, Clark. It's about, I believe there's a rumor out there that you're writing a new book, and we've had a couple of questions about that. You want to confirm or dispel that rumor?
Well, I'll be brief. This is about Donnelly Marcus's work, and of course related, of course, the beautiful work that is going on at the Mind Eye Institute. But there have been so many fabulously successful cases that Donnelly has had, where people come in with very, very challenging conditions and have not been helped elsewhere. And Donnelly's work has worked miracles in their lives, not necessarily being fully recovered, but at least getting better, and sometimes better for the first time. And these are interesting stories from a whole collection of different backgrounds and different cases. So it's a book that should be written. And unfortunately, I just ran into being overwhelmed at the university with COVID, putting all of my classes online and trying to stay in touch personally with all my students over the network. And then I had to be dad. You know, I have 6 children, and 2 of them really needed me this last year. So the book has been on hold, and then I have to go through the humbling process of going back, Debbie, to people that I did approach originally and were very willing to help and wanted to help others because they had been helped by Donnelly, helped through their stories, and apologizing for having gone missing. So that's where it stands right now, is Clark had to be dead. And I have one very quick comment. Someone asked about, well, what about all this visual spatial processing for people who are blind, and maybe blind for birth? And I'll include that as well, because it's a different category of problem. And the quick answer is that blind people still do spatial processing in very much the same way as the rest of us who are sighted people do. So I'm not a practitioner. I don't know all the details here, but certainly when I have blind students and having talked with people about these ideas, people who are blind, they said, yes, absolutely. Where I end and where the world begins is all part of my reasoning, the same as it is for sighted people. There are a few differences that maybe at 9 or 10 feet, their depth perception changes. For blind people, I believe it may be the case that somewhere around 10 to 15 feet from there to infinity gets compressed. It's all pretty much the same, but within the sphere around them, they see the world, quote, see very much in the same way. And that's also going to be true with people who are sighted, but are in the 3 to 5% who do not process the world visually. If you ask them to do a math problem, they have no problem solving it, but they don't see anything. So I think all of the principles still apply, and you could say, well, it's spatial processing. It may not be visual.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Clark, and Barbara and Rosalinde and Paul and Marla. You guys have made an impact on so many people by participating in this summit. I've gotten so many messages, and people are, are so inspired to continue to get well, and really have taken your information that you've shared to heart. I've already started receiving questions. How do I get in touch with them? Can you share some testimonials, or how do I decide when's the right time to go see them? So I just want you to know that you have made an impact by being here. Thank you for that. And for all the participants out there, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, to learn about neuroplasticity, to share your stories, and to help spread the word for all those people out there who think that they're at the end of the rope, that they're not. There is help out there. And these individuals on this panel are all proof positive that you can benefit from neuroplasticity and you can help yourself. And with that, I think we'll draw our summit to a close, and we'll see you for the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Look forward to staying in touch.
Thank
And
you.
I'll be reaching out to Paul and Clark and Rosalinde for recommendations for some new speakers and a record player. So I need some tech advice. So look for that email.
All right, the door's open.
Okay.
Barbara, Marla, Paul, Rosalinde, thank you so much for everything you do for people like me. You are real heroes. Thank you for that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your story.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.